Welcome, everyone. My name is Linas Vitkus, and thanks for joining us on another episode of Building Connections. Today, we're diving into several topics that are incredibly relevant to California's built environment, namely residential construction and seismic mitigation. I'm joined by a very special guest, Janiele Maffei, Chief Mitigation Officer at the California Earthquake Authority, who has been a leading voice in seismic safety and mitigation across the state. Janiele, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, really excited to have you on today. Before we get into details regarding the programs themselves, maybe we were hoping you could give us a little bit of detail about your background and what the California Earthquake Authority does for the state.
Well, I'm a California native, and that's important to know because it'll help you understand why I was so excited to take this dream job that I have right now. Born in the San Francisco Bay Area, went to Cal, majored in architecture, and then I defected into engineering and got my master's in structural engineering, and was a consultant for 30 years, doing just really exciting work here, predominantly in California, and obviously a lot of seismic work. A lot of the work we do here, particularly if you're working on existing buildings, is bringing them up to better codes, better seismic codes. And I was, getting a little older. Kids were out of the house. My husband traveled a lot for work, and I was kind of semi-retired. And this job flashed across my screen, and this job was the California Residential Mitigation Program. And it was just everything that I cared deeply about: California, the state of California, the seismic problem, and in particular residential construction, because residential construction, I always say this is such an important part of our built environment. It's probably the single most expensive investment people make, and it's where their family sleeps at night. So that consulting engineering career really helped me kind of ease into this job, and then this network I developed over all those years. I'm bringing all the brilliance of all of my fellow colleagues in the earthquake engineering profession. I'm bringing their incredible work to the good for Californians.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's certainly a program that is needed based on my understanding of a lot of the housing being very aged, built to different standards over time. So can you kind of give us a little more details in terms of what the California Residential Mitigation Program is?
Well, I think you were spot on in that that the age of a house, the year in which it was built, is very, very important, because of course that was the building code to which it was constructed. And there have been some tremendous changes to the building codes. And in California, most of them were related to a large earthquake and a new lesson that we learned. And so for single family construction in California, because it's predominantly wood framed, there were a bunch of earthquakes. There was and then the most important one to this process was the 1971 San Fernando Valley earthquake, Simi Valley earthquake. And huge changes in the late 1970s to the building code, particularly for housing. And so the 1980 code we're using as a standard, and pre-1980 houses have these vulnerabilities. Pre-1940 houses do have this vulnerability. And that pre-1940 data is very important as well, because up and down California, so much of our growth is related to the world wars, right? We had this huge amount of growth around the world wars because of the port cities, because of the importance of this state and those efforts. And so you've got this huge building stock of pre-1940 houses right on the fault system, the San Andreas fault system. So in harm's way. And however, we've learned so much, and our current building codes are so much better, that what we're trying to do with retrofitting, with going back into a house and making it stronger, is put in the same protections you'd find today in the building code back in those older buildings.
All right, yeah, understood. So what types of retrofits are we typically talking about here when it comes to this program, and how do they help with the overall seismic safety for those structures?
Right. Well, we have pictures from earthquakes, as far back as 6 on how single-family dwellings have performed in earthquakes. And so there was an understanding that the house that's on a crawl space, so the house that's got maybe 3, 4, 5 steps up to that first floor, has a crawl space underneath. You can see the vents around the bottom of your foundation. You're going to have an access panel somewhere, maybe on the outside, maybe in a closet. And that particular kind of house we've seen over and over again in earthquakes come off of their foundation. They just don't have the strength or stiffness to stay on that foundation. They can slide or topple. And so the first and foremost program that we developed, the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program, was to provide grants to homeowners who have these vulnerable houses with these unbraced and unbolted crawl spaces. And we provide up to $3,000 in a grant. This is not a loan. And it's about 2 to 3 days of work for a contractor, all done under the house. They go in and they put in new anchor bolts, either drilling down through the wood into the concrete or from the side with these steel plates. And then they put plywood shear walls is what we're creating around that crawl space. And then these steel framing clips along the top. So it's a pretty basic and simple. Obviously, I say simple. A contractor climbs on their house and goes, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? But really basic. And we've seen examples that it works. So that was our first effort. And then we knew that our next one was going to be the single family soft story. So everybody's heard in California about the cities who have adopted these mandatory multi-unit building soft story ordinances. These are the apartment complexes with what they call tuck under parking, very, very common in Southern California. And they were just horribly damaged in the Northridge earthquake. So it's taken quite a while for California, but lots of states have these mandatory ordinances. So in that multi-unit can be very, very deadly. Well, we have the same issue in single family dwellings. And I always say, if you can't picture what I'm talking about, think San Francisco, the single family house, driving down the street, that row house after row house that's got the entire house over that open garage. And when you have an open garage and you have that large garage door, you've taken out the elements that resist earthquake forces, which are walls. And so our second program, Earthquake Soft Story, ESS, is providing up to $13,000 to residents to retrofit that ground floor. So both of these are done on the bottom floor, the lowest floor of the building, both in single family dwellings. We've now done over 33,000 EBB houses. Very excited. ESS is still new. But people tell me, Linas, that like the first house that we retrofitted, we went out and we filmed the owner, and it was just so exciting under our belt. And he said, without prompting, he said, I sleep better at night. It's like he knew he was supposed to do this, didn't have the means to do it, retired, fixed income. And we were able to help him get this done. And so that's why I call it my dream job, is we're able to just make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty cool story in terms of, hey, I sleep better at night. I mean, I think whatever we could all do in our personal lives to make us sleep better at night, we would do it, right? So
Right.
that's a real cool story to hear.
Yeah.
How long has the program been in effect? I know you mentioned 33,000 homes, which is wild, but so in how many years has that been accomplished?
So I joined the CEA in 2011, and it took a couple years, and we got it up. So we rolled out the program in 2013, but only in 4 zip codes in California. I always say when you're gonna try something, best to do a pilot and start small. Set yourself up for success, not failure. And so we were in 2 zip codes, very high seismic region, lots of older houses in Oakland, and 2 in the Los Angeles area in that. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's up, kind of northwest of Pasadena. You can just imagine all those forces. And Eagle Rock, there it is.
Yeah.
And those communities were exactly where we wanted to be. And we started there, and we did 9 houses our first year. And we just thought, whoa, that was great. Knowing that, of course, we had to keep moving, because we estimate there are about over 1 million pre-1940 houses in areas of high seismicity in California. And then we've grown like what I call an amoeba. So every year we've gotten a little bit more money, and most of our money now is coming from FEMA grants. And we've just added zip codes, and we added them based on a list of zip codes that we have that are prioritized based on the number of pre-1940 houses and the level of your seismicity. And, they've grown like amoebas because cities do that as well, and they've grown on very high seismic areas throughout California. We're now in over 1,100 zip codes, and so grew incrementally. But when you start to see the graph of our growth, it really took off when we were able to get FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding. And those are federal grants that come back to a state after a disaster, specifically for mitigation. And they can come back to the state because of a fire, because of an earthquake, because of a flood. I think we all know California is just disaster prone. And they'll come back from FEMA when there was a presidential declaration, and that money can be spent on mitigation that is not tied to the particular kind of disaster. So we've been putting that money to good use. We're currently finishing off an $84 million grant from FEMA and expect to add another 5,000 or 6,000 houses to our tally.
Wow, that's great. So I was going to ask about the funding, so I appreciate you sharing that in terms of FEMA. Obviously, a lot of talk about FEMA and whether there'll be changes in funding and so forth. How do you know how that's going to potentially impact this program?
Well, it has impacted us, and I'll tell you why. Is that I got a little deep in there and telling you about the multi-unit, and we in fact we're going to stand up a grant program for multi-unit soft story buildings. We were going to go into these cities that have the mandatory ordinances and start to help them with some funding, and hopefully promote other cities to pass their mandatory ordinances. In other words, keep that momentum going. We had been awarded $40 million in BRIC funding. And I think a lot of people have heard BRIC on the news lately. BRIC funding was canceled by the administration. We were able to keep the phase one BRIC funding that we had. So we have established the rules. We've got the website. It's like we've got everything but the money. We'd even called the cities with mandatory ordinances and said, we want to work with you. This program is coming to you. And then it was canceled. And, I won't get political because it frankly just won't do anyone any good. But I will be very honest and serious about this. Was a very important program to put to a deadly kind of a building, and also multi-unit buildings are housing predominantly renters, and renters are a large percentage of those are low to moderate income. So our most vulnerable communities and some of our most vulnerable housing, and that we were going to go after. So since that happened, and that money was canceled, 20 states combined and have all joined together to sue FEMA. Obviously, that is obviously at the request of the administration, because they believe that money it wasn't legal to cancel that money. And a judge in, I believe, Massachusetts has issued an injunction to make sure that that money isn't removed from FEMA, taken and used somewhere else. So the money is now on hold at FEMA. There's a huge push, lots and lots of states who are going to do all kinds of. And so we're hoping that sense will come back into this, and the money will come to the states and will continue to come to the states. When we're looking at disaster recovery, that's just one part of the disaster circle. One of the most important pieces of dealing with disasters is mitigation. If we can reduce the expected damage, we significantly increase the likelihood people can stay in their houses after an event. We reduce the damage. And in this case of residential construction, particularly single family, that's damage that is going to be all on the homeowner. We only have 14% of Californians with earthquake insurance. And so with that low earthquake insurance level, and frankly, FEMA does come in after disaster, but they don't come in as an insurance company. They don't come in and just start handing out money to everybody. They come in for people who have means, they come in with low interest loans, SBA loans, and they come in with $33,000 or less for people for kind of emergency safety housing. So everybody's always looking for FEMA to come into their community afterwards, and they do come and they do bring help, but it is not making you whole. So to reduce the damage, to put you and your family in a better position to be able to be resilient in the earthquake, not earthquake proof, you'll still have but the kinds of vulnerabilities that we're attacking with our programs are the kinds that take you off your foundation, significantly increase the likelihood your house is red tagged. So that funding is very, very important. We're hoping that the BRIC funding will be restored. In the meantime, with that canceled program, we've gone back to the grant that we've been successful with, that HMGP grant funding that comes to the state. And we've put applications in for all of our programs. So we think we're going to be able to continue with our programs. We're hoping that BRIC funding comes back. We're hoping that the focus very much returns to resilience and to mitigation. And we don't just, think that we're just going to sit around with our federal agencies waiting for a disaster to happen and then come in. There's so much we can do before.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, and good luck with that. And if there's anything we can do to assist with that, we'd certainly love to help as well. You mentioned resiliency quite a bit, so maybe changing topics a little bit, going into just the resiliency of residential construction. From your perspective, why is resilient residential construction so critical in California, especially given our exposure to earthquakes and wildfires?
Right. So now I'm gonna take it up another level, not too technical, but another level, in that I talked about the protections that we have in the new codes that we're trying to bring to these older structures. It's important to note that the building code, and this is the building code that's used across the United States, has a target of life safety. Now, this means that you could have a building that's designed to the building code. Like, for example, it's designed for wind, earthquakes, gravity. And the idea is that in an earthquake, in the design earthquake from the code, it would afford life safety. It would afford the occupants the ability to safely egress and essentially to not be killed in that building. It could be a total financial loss. And that total financial loss is that's the arena where we're talking about damage. And so we want to stop talking about just life safety and start to talk about damage. And so in an era where affordable housing is just right at the tip of our tongues, where all of us, our ADU laws have changed so that we can increase housing in our communities. They're trying to convert business, commercial buildings to residential. Affordable housing can't be, though, the opponent of good construction. So we have to be very careful. We don't want to have such aspirations that our construction, is flying through the roof, but we can look smartly at construction and look for opportunities within our constructional convention provisions, within, our kind of the norm for how we're building houses, and start to increase the resilience of those houses. These very wood frame houses, and we put all kinds of brittle materials on them. I've walked through hundreds of houses after earthquakes. The ones that stay on the foundation still have lots of cracking to the exterior finishes, the interior finishes, all the tile. They may have racked a little bit. The chimney will have toppled off. Contents everywhere. There's a lot we can do to reduce that kind of damage, in just kind of maybe rethinking our residential construction. And maybe we need to move outside of our siloed way of construction. We've got people who are working on concrete, people who are working on masonry, people working on gypsum wallboard, all these industries that are doing incredible work and doing incredible research on their products. Maybe we need to be a little bit more like the aerospace industry. They need to be lean machine that they send up into space, because any weight you have on that aircraft, you got to plow up through the atmosphere with fuel, right? Maybe we could have materials that are not just for fireproofing, and materials not just for structural seismic strengthening, and one for keeping the wind out, but things that we're putting on houses that are doing all of those things, that will perform better in an earthquake. And then maybe we can see, the cost for resilience not going sky high. So I'm kind of dreaming there and looking at the future. There is a movement in California to increase the building codes. This is predominantly for commercial structures, called functional recovery, which is just simply saying, look, we do this for hospitals and it's very expensive. We know it is. A hospital, the earthquake happens, the lights are not supposed to flicker, that generator comes on and that surgery goes on, right? That you don't have to move acute care patients where 5% of them are going to die during that move. That's what functional recovery is. we don't need that hospital performance for a house, but we can start to look at maybe moving that house more towards a functional recovery of, first and foremost, the family in that house, shelter in place mentality. Let's see if we can reduce the amount that it moves so that it's the kind of damage that is within their ability to their affordability, so that they can be resilient, financially resilient in an earthquake. So I think there's lots that the industry can do, and there's some movement in that direction. And we in the earthquake insurance industry are excited to be kind of involved in that, and we're involved in that with our mitigation program, and we're trying to be involved on a broader scale.
So obviously you talk a lot about industry, and a lot of that's going to take change and probably innovation as well. But then you have the consumer side, so the homeowner or a developer, and a lot of the times, they're used to what they want, or they want a specific finish, or those types of things. So are you seeing any work towards trying to educate, homeowners and developers and so forth about how to make their construction more resilient? And are you seeing an interest in that side as well?
So not yet. I think, baby steps. And what we're able to do right now with our mitigation program is we started out with 8 and we've now done 33,000. I'm just very excited when I'm going and making a presentation that there are people in the room who have done the EBB retrofit, people who've heard about it. We were looking at houses a few years ago, and the realtor didn't know what I do for a living and said, "Oh yeah, there's a state program that could give you money to retrofit that crawl space." And I'm thinking, that's what we want. We want there to be social capital to a culture of resilience, and that social capital is that you know about it. When you buy a house, I need to look to see that this house is going to be able to protect my family in a natural disaster. And I know that my saying that, people are going to go, people who work with low to moderate income communities are going to be going, yeah, that all sounds fine and good. When a person of fewer resources is looking for a house, they don't have the same choices. And so equity, I'm going to use the word because I believe in it, is so important in this challenge to make it so that everybody understands what our goals should be and are striving towards them. Once again, when you buy a house, that there might be a vulnerability. You're looking for that. When you remodel your house, the contractor knows that, hey, I noticed under your house you haven't done this. This would be the perfect time to do it. And we just we float all boats, we elevate everyone's knowledge of the fact that we live in earthquake country and how important resilience is.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. In terms of, well, we touched on, the retrofits, and that a lot of that is old building codes that through earthquakes we find out that they're not sufficient. Do you feel the current building code as it is that showing that current construction standards are meeting the requirements in terms of at least seismic resiliency?
Yeah, so I think that the building code, but once again, the performance level that we're designing to is life safety. So I think that particularly
so it's raising that bar.
Yeah, it's life safety. And so people just need to understand. It's like when we do the retrofit, we try to say over and over again, look, we are going after one particular vulnerability in your house. We cannot earthquake proof it. You will still have damage. Get back out from under their table and look around and go, well, I thought that they retrofitted my house. Why do I have cracks in my wall? And what we want you to say is, yeah, my house stayed on its foundation, because that was what we were retrofitting. And so there are some really great houses that perform very well in and they're constructed to the conventional construction provisions of the code, slab on grade, story, lots of walls, organic windows. They got lots of walls, lots of redundancy. Those do well. They have cracks, they may have damage, but it's the kind of damage that, once again, a family can stay in place. And sometimes you can get some of these engineered, the McMansions. They've got those heavy tile, the heavy stucco on them, and engineer that family wanted that great big giant open room, and they wanted the 2-story staircase, and none of those are going to kill them. They're absolutely designed to life safety, but all of those elements contribute to damage, and so it's just important to note that as we're making these decisions, when we have our eye on resilience, we might make a different decision. For example, I want to put in I want to have a beautiful home with a 2-story entryway when I come in. I may ask the engineer who's designing that I know that these 2-story elements are more damageable. Let's make sure that that beautiful entryway isn't what's going to kick us out of this house after an earthquake, just because the damage is so severe.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. In terms of the resiliency, we've talked about earthquakes a lot, but California obviously, and you mentioned it earlier in terms of we're disaster prone.
Yeah.
And obviously have had wildfires for a very long time. Early this year, had very devastating wildfires locally here. I'm in the Los Angeles area. And so many were impacted by those and are still impacted by those and are still recovering from those. Do you see an opportunity for resilience there in terms of similarly what you speak to in regards to the earthquake damage?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we should be talking. We want to be aware of our silos, right? The earthquake folks are here, the wildfire people here, the flood people here. We should be talking about smart housing and smart construction. And for example, somebody goes in to harden their house against wildfires. Once again, a contractor's already on site. It's an older home. They should be going under the house and putting in bolts and plywood, and vice versa. I've been doing a seismic retrofit on a house. If I'm putting plywood in a certain area and you're going to be putting the finishes back on, you should be looking for ignition resistance, fire resistant finishes. It's just an opportunity. And the codes, and one of the issues you're kind of thinking, well, why, if you're redoing something, why doesn't it require you to put it up to current code? Well, that's that affordability issue. And once again, I'm not saying it's a wrong issue. It's a challenge to us, because if you only do a certain amount of work to your house, you're not going to have to bring it up to a full code. And so you will not necessarily have reached out and grabbed the latest thinking, the best thinking about fire resilience and earthquake resilience. And earthquake resilience tends to give us wind resistance here in California. So I think we can start talking about a smart house. And then I'm always quick to say that we need to look at natural disasters also on a kind of a holistic basis. And right now we are preoccupied with wildfires, as we should be. Those were horrific. Just horrific. And I live in the Oakland Hills and went through the 1991 fire. We did not lose our home, but it was very close, and I had many friends and family who did. But we can't get in competition between all our little silos, right? People always say, well, earthquakes aren't affected by global climate change, right? And I go, well, yeah, they are. And let me tell you how they are, is that they are a disaster. We need funding. We need capital to insure against disaster and mitigate disaster. And the cost of capital is going up and up and up and up because of climate change affecting natural disasters like wind, like hurricane, like flood, and like fire. Mm-hmm. And so we're all in this boat together. We're all competing for some of the same dollars. We're working on the same houses. We should be working towards the same goal. So I think this concept of the smart, resilient house is where we should be going. Now, Altadena and Pacific Palisades, or when they do build, they're all going to go back with the new code. And it's and I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of push off for defensive base. And those, I will tell you that the people in the hills were like insurance purchasers after that fire. They had been through hell, and they had seen firsthand disaster. And I know that the folks in Southern California are going to do the same, and they're going to be very wise. But everybody else will start to become complacent again, because we just do. We haven't had a major earthquake in a long time. We've been a little complacent. Now's the time to think about smart and resilient.
Yeah, and it's interesting to understand how the insurers can maybe become more involved in that and possibly require it in terms of getting the insurance, or and if everyone's having to do it, then I think that creates a demand for people providing those services, which in the end should bring those costs of services down as well, where it's not as specialized. I mean, again, I'm local to Los Angeles area, but far away from the fire, so was not impacted by them personally. But I got my insurance renewal, and guess what? It used to be, I think, full value. So whatever, if there were code upgrades or whatever, they would cover all that. Now it's not that anymore. So I'm impacted by it. All homeowners are impacted by it. So to your point, if we can prevent these disasters from occurring in the first place, it's really a benefit to all of us.
Very much all in this together.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Janiele, this has been extremely insightful, a lot of really good information. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else that you wanted to share, whether it be with homeowners, builders, policymakers, regarding resilient construction in California?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that particular question because I consider everyone to be a teammate. When we talk to a building department, I say, we're not going to tell you how to do your job. We're going to work with you and we're going to try and stay in our lane because that's when we all bring our best. So we consider each of those members that you got to be our partners. I think we can do great things. And as I said, I just so privileged to have this second opportunity of a career. And I don't know what retirement's going to look like because I've got so many things left on my bucket list. But there's a lot of people working on this, and I'm going to say the future is bright.
All right. Well, we always love to end on a positive note. And personally, I want to say that I'm thankful that I've had the ability to work on this program as well since the pilot program, especially in a state like California where there's not enough housing. The housing that we do have is incredibly expensive. So it's absolutely critical that the housing that we do have is sustainable, is going to be there after natural disasters, because if not, it just makes the problem that much worse. So thank you for all the hard work you're doing. I appreciate your time spending with me today to share all of this. We will be sharing all of the links to the programs within the description for this podcast. And with that, I'd just like to say thanks again for joining us.
Hey, Linus, I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.